My stepdaughter demanded I give her my late wife's wedding ring for her engagement. When I refused, she stole it and pawned it, so I called the police and had her arrested. Here I am at 52 years old, trying to make sense of how my family fell apart over a piece of jewelry that meant everything to me and apparently nothing to the person who stole it. This whole mess started 3 months ago, but to really understand what happened, I need to go back about 5 years to when I married my second wife, Patricia. My first wife, Elena, died of cancer when she was only 38. We'd been married for 15 years, and losing her nearly destroyed me. She was the love of my life, my best friend, and the kindest person I'd ever known. When she passed, I thought I'd never love again or even want to try. Elena had this beautiful vintage wedding ring that had belonged to her grandmother, a delicate rose gold band with a small but perfect diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. It wasn't expensive by today's standards, maybe worth $1,500, but it was priceless to me because it represented our love and her family's history. After Elena died, I kept her ring in a special jewelry box on my dresser. Sometimes I'd hold it when I missed her, which was often. I never planned to remarry, but 3 years after Elena's death, I met Patricia at a grief support group. She'd lost her husband in a car accident and was raising her teenage daughter Melissa alone. Patricia was nothing like Elena, where Elena had been quiet and thoughtful, Patricia was outgoing and energetic. But she understood loss in a way that most people couldn't, and slowly, we found comfort in each other. Patricia knew about Elena's ring from early in our relationship. I'd shown it to her and explained what it meant to me, and she said she understood completely. She had her own keepsakes from her first husband and respected that I needed to hold on to Elena's memory. When we got engaged, Patricia chose her own ring, and she never once suggested I should give her Elena's ring or that I should get rid of it. I thought she truly understood how important it was to me. When Patricia and I married, Melissa was 17 and not thrilled about her mother remarrying. I tried to be understanding, she'd lost her father and now had to adjust to a new stepfather. I never tried to replace her dad or force a relationship. I was kind but kept my distance, letting her set the pace for our interactions. Over the 5 years Patricia and I were married, Melissa and I developed a cordial but not particularly close relationship. She was polite to me, and I helped with her college expenses and supported her however I could, but we were never really family in the way I'd hoped we might become. Melissa graduated college last year and moved back home while she looked for a job. She'd been dating her boyfriend Jake for about 2 years, and earlier this year they got engaged. I was happy for her and offered to help with wedding expenses, just as I would for any family member. Patricia was over the moon about planning the wedding and kept talking about how excited she was to see her daughter as a bride. The trouble started 2 months ago when Melissa came to me with what she called a request but felt more like a demand. She sat me down in the living room and told me she'd been thinking about wedding traditions and something borrowed, something blue. Then she said she wanted to wear Elena's ring as her something borrowed because it would be meaningful to have a family heirloom as part of her special day. I was stunned. I explained to Melissa that Elena's ring wasn't just any piece of jewelry, it was deeply personal to me and represented my first marriage. I told her I'd be happy to help her find another piece of jewelry for her, something borrowed, maybe something from Patricia's family or we could shop for something special together. But Elena's ring was not something I could lend out, not even for a wedding. Melissa's reaction was immediate and intense. She started crying and said I was being selfish and mean. She claimed that since I was her stepfather, Elena's ring was technically family jewelry now and she had every right to wear it. She said it wasn't fair that I was keeping it locked away in a box when it could be part of making new memories. She kept saying it was just for one day and that she'd take good care of it and give it right back. The more I tried to explain why this was impossible for me, the more upset Melissa became. She started accusing me of loving Elena more than Patricia and her, which wasn't true but was incredibly hurtful. She said I was stuck in the past and needed to move on and think about my current family. She even suggested that Elena would have wanted her ring to be worn by family members rather than sitting in a box collecting dust. That last comment really got to me because Melissa didn't know Elena and had no right to speak for what she would have wanted. Elena and I had actually talked about the ring during her illness, and she'd specifically said she wanted me to keep it always as a reminder of our love. She'd even made me promise never to give it away, which I'd never told anyone, not even Patricia. I told Melissa firmly that my answer was no and that this wasn't up for discussion or negotiation. The ring was staying exactly where it was, and she needed to respect that decision. Melissa stormed out of the room, and I could hear her upstairs crying and talking angrily on the phone, probably to Jake or one of her friends. Later that evening, Patricia approached me about the ring situation. She said she understood why I wanted to keep the ring, but maybe I should reconsider because it would mean so much to Melissa and it was just for one day. She suggested that letting Melissa wear the ring might be a nice way to honor Elena's memory while also showing Melissa that she was truly part of our family. I was disappointed that Patricia didn't immediately support my decision, but I tried to stay calm and explain my position again. I told her that the ring wasn't just sentimental to me, it was sacred. It represented promises I'd made to Elena and memories that belonged only to us. I said I'd be happy to buy Melissa any other piece of jewelry she wanted or help her find a family heirloom from Patricia's side, but Elena's ring was completely off limits. Patricia seemed to accept this, though I could tell she wasn't entirely happy about it. She said she'd talk to Melissa and help her understand, and she'd make sure Melissa found something else special to wear. I thought that was the end of it, but I was very wrong. Over the next few weeks, Melissa kept bringing up the ring in various ways. She'd make comments about how some stepmothers leave jewelry to their stepchildren and how it was sad that Elena's beautiful ring was just sitting unused. She'd talk about how meaningful it would be to have something that connected her to our family's history. Sometimes she'd cry and say she felt like I didn't really consider her family since I wouldn't share something so important with her. Each time, I'd calmly but firmly restate my position. The ring was not available, period. I started to feel like I was being manipulated and emotionally blackmailed, which made me even more determined not to give in. I learned in my grief counseling that it was important to maintain boundaries around items that held special meaning, and I wasn't going to let anyone pressure me into doing something I knew I'd regret forever. About 3 weeks ago, I noticed that Melissa's attitude toward me had become noticeably colder. She'd barely speak to me at dinner and would leave the room when I entered. Patricia said Melissa was just disappointed and would get over it, but I could tell there was more going on. Melissa kept making passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty and sharing, and I started to feel uncomfortable in my own home. Then, 2 weeks ago, I went to check on Elena's ring as I did periodically, and it was gone. The jewelry box was still there, but it was empty. I checked everywhere, thinking maybe I'd moved it and forgotten, but I knew I hadn't. I always kept it in the same place, and I was very careful with it. My heart started racing as the reality sank in. Someone had taken Elena's ring. I immediately called Patricia at work and told her what had happened. She came home right away, and we searched the entire house together, but the ring was nowhere to be found. Patricia suggested maybe I'd moved it for safekeeping and forgotten, but I knew that wasn't the case. I'd looked at the ring just a week earlier, and it had definitely been in its usual spot. When Melissa came home from work that evening, I asked her directly if she knew anything about the missing ring. She looked me straight in the eye and said she had no idea what I was talking about. She seemed genuinely surprised and even offered to help look for it. But something about her reaction felt off to me, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. We spent the entire evening searching the house again, and Patricia kept trying to think of explanations. Maybe there had been a break-in, though nothing else was missing and there were no signs of forced entry. Maybe our cleaning lady had accidentally knocked it somewhere while dusting, though she'd been with us for 3 years and had never had any problems. Every explanation felt forced and unlikely. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Melissa's reaction and how she'd been so persistent about wanting to borrow the ring. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that she'd taken it. But I had no proof, and accusing my stepdaughter of stealing my late wife's wedding ring was a serious allegation that could destroy our family. The next morning, I decided to check with local pawn shops, just in case. I figured if someone had stolen the ring to sell it, they might try to pawn it nearby. I printed out a photo of the ring and started visiting shops in our area. The third shop I visited, the owner immediately recognized the ring from my photo. He told me someone had brought it in just 2 days earlier and pawned it for $300. My heart sank when he showed me the paperwork. The person who'd pawned the ring had provided identification, and it was Melissa. There it was in black and white, her name, address, and signature on the pawn ticket. She'd sold Elena's irreplaceable ring for $300, less than a quarter of its actual value and a tiny fraction of its sentimental worth. I felt sick to my stomach as I paid the shop owner to get the ring back. He was sympathetic when I explained the situation and said this kind of family theft was more common than people realized. He gave me copies of all the paperwork, including the surveillance footage of Melissa pawning the ring. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. When I got home with the ring and the paperwork, I confronted Melissa immediately. I laid out the pawn shop documents on the kitchen table and asked her to explain herself. For a moment, she tried to deny it, but when she saw the paperwork with her signature and the surveillance photos, she broke down crying. Melissa's explanation was a rambling mess of justifications and excuses. She said she'd only taken the ring because I was being unreasonable and selfish. She claimed she'd planned to get it back before the wedding and return it to me, and I'd never even know it was gone. She said she needed the money for wedding expenses and figured the ring was just sitting there unused anyway, so what was the harm in getting a short-term loan against it? She kept apologizing and saying she'd made a terrible mistake, but she also kept trying to justify her actions. She said I was being cruel by keeping the ring locked away when it could help family members who needed it. She insisted she never meant to steal it permanently and that she loved me and would never hurt me intentionally. I was devastated and furious. This wasn't just theft, it was a profound violation of trust and a desecration of Elena's memory. Melissa had looked me in the eye and lied when I'd asked about the ring. She'd sat through our frantic searching and our worry about break-ins, all while knowing exactly where the ring was. She'd pawned something irreplaceable for $300 and then acted like the victim when I wouldn't give her what she wanted. Patricia tried to play peacekeeper, begging me not to involve the police and insisting that Melissa had learned her lesson. She said we could handle this as a family and that calling the police would ruin Melissa's life over a mistake. She kept emphasizing that I'd gotten the ring back and no permanent harm was done. But I couldn't see it that way. Melissa was 23 years old, not a confused teenager. She'd planned this theft, executed it while looking me in the eye and lying, and only showed remorse when she got caught with undeniable evidence. The fact that I'd gotten the ring back didn't undo the violation or guarantee she wouldn't do something similar again. I told Patricia and Melissa that I was calling the police. Melissa started crying harder and begging me not to ruin her life over this. She promised she'd do anything to make it right and that she'd never take anything again. Patricia was angry with me and said I was being vindictive and choosing a piece of jewelry over my family. That comment really hurt because it showed that neither Patricia nor Melissa understood what this was really about. This wasn't about choosing jewelry over family, this was about trust, respect, and boundaries. If someone could steal something so precious to me and lie about it repeatedly, how could I ever trust them again? And if there were no consequences for such a serious violation, what message did that send about respecting other people's belongings and feelings? I called the police that afternoon and filed a theft report. The officer who took my statement was professional and understanding. When I showed him the pawn shop paperwork and explained the situation, he said it was a clear case of theft regardless of family relationships. He said they'd investigate and would likely press charges based on the evidence. The next few days were horrible. Melissa was served with papers and had to appear in court. She hired a lawyer with money from Patricia's family, and they tried to negotiate some kind of plea deal. Patricia was furious with me and said I was destroying our family over my obsession with Elena's memory. She accused me of never really accepting her and Melissa as my real family and said this proved I'd always loved Elena more than them. Melissa's friends and some of Patricia's family started calling me heartless and vindictive. They said I was ruining a young woman's future over a ring and that families should stick together through mistakes. Some people suggested I was having some kind of breakdown related to grief and wasn't thinking clearly. But I also had support from people who understood the real issue. My brother said he was proud of me for standing up for myself and not letting family manipulate me into accepting unacceptable behavior. Elena's sister called to say she was glad I was protecting Elena's memory and not letting anyone take advantage of my kindness. My grief counselor said I was absolutely right to maintain boundaries and that what Melissa had done was a serious violation that deserved consequences. The legal process took about 6 weeks. Melissa's lawyer tried to argue that this was a family dispute rather than criminal theft, but the evidence was too clear. Melissa had taken property that didn't belong to her, pawned it for money, and lied about it repeatedly. The prosecutor offered a plea deal where Melissa would plead guilty to petty theft, pay restitution for my costs and stress, complete community service, and attend counseling. Melissa ultimately accepted the plea deal. She had to pay me back for the money I'd spent getting the ring from the pawn shop, plus fees for my time and stress. She was sentenced to 60 hours of community service and had to attend 6 months of counseling about respecting other people's property and boundaries. The whole process was emotionally exhausting, but I felt like I'd done the right thing. I'd protected Elena's memory and shown that there are consequences for serious violations of trust. Some people might think I went too far, but I believe that family relationships require mutual respect and trust, and those things have to be maintained even when it's difficult. Patricia and I separated during the legal proceedings and are now getting divorced. She never could understand why I'd pressed charges against Melissa, and I never could understand how she expected me to just forgive such a serious betrayal. We tried counseling, but we kept coming back to the same fundamental disagreement about family loyalty versus personal boundaries. Melissa completed her community service and counseling as required by the court. She sent me a letter afterward apologizing again and saying she finally understood why what she'd done was so wrong. She said the counseling had helped her realize that she'd felt entitled to things that weren't hers and that she'd been manipulative in trying to get her way. She asked if we could eventually work toward rebuilding some kind of relationship, though she understood if I wasn't ready for that. I wrote back and told Melissa I appreciated her apology and was glad the counseling had been helpful. I said I wasn't ready to have a close relationship again, but I didn't wish her any harm and hoped she'd learn from this experience. I told her I hoped she had a good life and a happy marriage, but that our paths would probably not cross much in the future. Elena's ring is back in its special place in my jewelry box, where it belongs. I still look at it sometimes when I miss her, and I'm grateful I was able to protect it and the memories it represents. Some people might think I was too harsh or that I should have just let it go to keep the peace, but I believe some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight is painful and costly. Looking back, I realize this situation revealed fundamental differences in values that probably would have caused problems eventually anyway. Patricia and Melissa believed family loyalty meant never holding family members accountable for serious wrongdoing. I believe family loyalty means caring enough about each other to maintain standards and boundaries that make trust possible. I'm sad that my second marriage ended and that I lost the relationship I'd been building with Melissa, but I'm not sorry I stood up for myself and for Elena's memory. Some betrayals are too serious to overlook, and some boundaries are too important to compromise. I learned that it's possible to love people and still hold them accountable when they cross lines that should never be crossed.